All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Hopefully everybody's got in. Everyone can hear me okay. If not, you can send a message there in the chat room and we'll see what we can do to work on that if you're not hearing me clearly. I want to welcome you all today. My name is Stacy Bohannon and I'm the president of the Women in Cybersecurity Northern Alabama affiliate. We also have the rest of our leadership team on, and we're also partnered with this event with our WESIS Tennessee affiliate. Their leadership team is on as well. So thank you so much for coming out and supporting the WESIS organization. We do appreciate it. If you're not familiar with us, we would love to have you become a member. All the information about that can be found at our website, wesis.org/join. And then if you're not sure about our organization, you want to learn a little more before you commit to membership, you are welcome to also subscribe to our newsletter there to give you a better feel about what we do in our organization and what we're all about. Like I said, my name is Stacy Bohannon. Currently, my full-time job is actually a public affairs specialist with the National Cybersecurity Operations Center here in Huntsville, Alabama. I just retired out of the FBI. That's how Scott and I know each other. He'll talk a little bit about that for you. And also, the leadership team, like I said, of Tennessee is on, and they are currently forming their affiliate. So if you have an interest in serving in their leadership team, please reach out to the Tennessee affiliate as well. And then I'll be remiss to also thank our corporate partner today, Armor Blocks. Armor Blocks is an API security-based platform. They are really focused on targeting email scams, some of which Scott's going to go into a little bit more in depth today and give you some tips and insights into that. They also work across multiple platforms, including Office 365, the G Suite, and the Exchange. So we're going to jump right into our topic today. I'm going to turn it over to Scott, who does a much better job of introducing himself than me, other than we were former co-workers. So Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Stacy, it's always good to see you. There's something about former FBI people who are retired who have big smiles on their face. I know if I could see Tim Dwyer right now, I'm sure he was smiling right now. A good friend of mine is on. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Scott Augenbaum, retired FBI agent. I'm based in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm so sorry about my voice today. Woke up with a sore throat and started to panic a little bit, but I'm here, so that's all good. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk to you a little bit about the emerging cybercrime threat, how it has changed quite dramatically during my career. And I hate to say it, how a lot of it has really stayed the same. I really appreciate everyone coming out here today to be on the path, to be here, to participate with us. I know your time is valuable, and we want to promise you we're not going to really give you a boring discussion. I have my good friend Rob Fry, who's here with me today from Armor Blocks. I'm going to pick on him a little bit later, and we're going to talk about what's going on in the world of information security and how not to be the next victim. If you would have told me almost 32 years ago, that this is what I'd be doing now, going out and speaking to people, I would say, no way, that wouldn't be my life. Started my career in the FBI in 1988 as a support employee in the New York City field office. I became an agent in 1994. My first office of assignment was Syracuse, New York. And if you'd asked me to describe the role of what the FBI did in 1995, it was really easy to do. There were bad people who did bad things to good people, and I worked with state and local cops, and I put bad guys in jail. What a fun and exciting job for a 27-year-old kid from Brooklyn, New York. A gun, a badge, a bulletproof vest. We played cops and robbers, and we put bad guys in jail. We were working white-collar cases. I have a former colleague of mine who's listening here. We can go on for hours about all the different bank robbery cases. And it was just really, really fulfilling because we put bad guys in jail. And now we're going to talk a little bit, because that's not really what ended up happening in the transition of the FBI and cybercrime. I got involved working cybercrime in 2003 as a supervisor at FBI headquarters, as the newly formed cyber division for the FBI. It was in 2002, the FBI formed a cyber division at FBI headquarters to deal with this emerging cyber threat. And I got assigned to Nashville, Tennessee. That was my first office. I'm sure most of you can tell by the Southern accent, so I'll greet you like I usually do. Stacy, so how are y'all doing today? Stacy, am I getting any better on my Southern accent or what?
Yeah, I think I keep getting worse and you keep getting better.
Okay, yeah, that's about right. And I got to Nashville in 2007 as the first supervisor of the FBI cybercrime squad. And I supervised a group of agents and task force officers who were handling every single thing cybercrime related. And we were running and gunning, but we were doing a lot of child exploitation back in 2007. And one of the things that I realized about working cyber cases is they were a lot more complicated to work than traditional cases. And we would see that because there was a model when you worked criminal investigations. What was that model? You took a complaint call in, somebody got ripped off, you spoke to them, you went to the US Attorney's Office, they opened up a case, you got grand jury subpoenas, you went through bank records, you went through telephone records. Sometimes we used sophisticated techniques. We got enough probable cause. We did a search warrant. We interviewed the bad guy. And then it took some time, and either he pled guilty or it went to trial. And I did about 40 cases that way. And a lot of them weren't big cases. A lot of them were really small cases. But that was the model. But all of a sudden, cybercrime comes in, and we're starting to deal with different things. Because let me tell you, the first cybercrime case that I worked on, and I was dealing with stuff in the 90s, we were chasing thrill seekers and amateurs. But I remember the first actual financial loss I saw in a cybercrime case was in 2002. 2002, and in 2005, I started seeing the targeted phishing attacks that were taking place. And at FBI headquarters, we formed a task force to deal with the Hurricane Katrina fraud because all the phishing emails were coming in. Think about that. 15 years ago, we were still dealing with the same issues. Now, when I get to Nashville, we start working these cases. A lot of them are predicated by email. But one of the things that we're starting to see is it's difficult to identify the origination of the threat actor. So all of a sudden, we would find out that a business in Nashville, Tennessee was hacked into. And then, so we would open up a case, we'd get a grand jury subpoena. We would figure out that the company was where the attack came from was in California. We'd send a subpoena out to that company. It usually took maybe 2 months to close the lead because the FBI agents are doing a lot of other things. At that point, as that goes on, we get the information back 2 months later, and what do we find out? That company was compromised. And from there, we'd have to send another subpoena and another subpoena and another subpoena. And by the time you forgot how many subpoenas you would send. And I would say and all of a sudden, so now I have this job working cybercrime. I'm doing it for about 4 years, and I'm just not feeling what I did working criminal cases. Because you weren't getting that job satisfaction. It was almost Groundhog's Day every single day. And then what do we end up seeing? 2014 is a game changer in cyber. We start seeing what happens. It really, in my opinion, it starts with the Target breach in 2013. And then from Target, we have Community Health Systems, which is in Nashville, Tennessee, the first time the Chinese government actually hacks into a healthcare company to steal information. I've been seeing that for decades. We have Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield. We have Home Depot. And it ends that year when we have Sony. So now we start seeing targeted attacks from the Russians, the North Koreans, the Chinese. I think that's a game changer. But one of the things that you don't see is you don't see what's going on behind the scenes, because all you're finding out is what's happening to the large enterprise organizations. You're not seeing these small companies. And every single day, the victimizations keep continuing and keep continuing till this time, until they don't start. And I'm going to really kind of walk you through a little bit of the process, because I think you really need to understand what ends up happening here. Yeah, I retire from the FBI in 2018. I write a book called The Secret to Cybersecurity. And I go around the country and I teach organizations and I teach individuals how not to become the next cybercrime victim based on what I've learned from when I was with the FBI. And today, the cybercrime problem, well, if we look back and we go to that pivotal year in 2015, what do we find out in 2015? The cybercrime problem was a $3 trillion problem. $3 trillion was the global cost of cybercrime, according to Cybersecurity Ventures. Great stats on cybercrime. And by the year 2021, which is going to only be a couple of months away, that's going to be the problem's going to increase to a $6 trillion problem. So we're going to see a 100% increase until we just had a little issue happen. And what did we call that issue? COVID-19 and throws the industries completely upside down, because now we have everybody working from home. And now everyone's logging in remotely. I sit down with individuals, I talk to them, I go, oh, you're working from home. Do you have two-factor authentication set up on your system? And they usually ask me, what's that? Hey, let me ask you, and this is, can we do polling question number 3 first, or do we got to go in order?
We can do 3 first.
Let's do the one with two-factor, because I always like to get that going. And this way it gives me a chance to do that. Let me ask you, we're going to put a polling question up. Do you have two-factor authentication on your business and on your personal accounts? All right, come on. Let's see the numbers over here. Come on, I'm going to sit here and drink my tea until we have. Come on, there's 27 people, there's 18. Come on, there's 9 of you who are on playing along over here. Fully implemented, partially implemented, not implemented. You know, that's one of the number one things that a lot of my victims all had in common. And with that being said, the cybercrime problem is going to increase even more. But what else? What's the bigger problem here? At the same time, when the cybercrime problem was a $3 trillion problem, we were spending $88 billion on keeping ourselves safe. What were we purchasing? Hardware, software, vendors. We had insurance. Oh, don't get me going on insurance. I can talk about that forever. Not ready for that one yet. But by the time 2021 comes around, we're going to be spending about $1 trillion cumulatively on keeping ourselves safe. So, Stacy, I'm going to throw a quick little math question at you, or a logic question. I got to keep you engaged over here. Okay. What does it mean to you when we keep spending money to fix a problem and the problem keeps getting worse? What does that mean?
Solution is not working. You are spending bad money, my friend.
You're spending bad money. And one of the things that I see all the time is, we keep spending more and more money on keeping ourselves safe. But one of the things that I kind of discovered during my career was almost a majority of the victimizations that I dealt with could have been prevented if the individuals just had a key pieces of information. I wrote a book about that called The Secret to Cybersecurity. If you hear me plugging my book today, it's not to make you go out and buy the book. I don't think anyone from Armor Blocks can hear me. But I made Armor Blocks get the books for everyone here today. So we're going to make reference, because this is the key pieces of information that I have seen time and time again. There was only a couple of key pieces of information, if they had them. And during my career with the FBI, I had the opportunity, unfortunately, after, I have this aha moment, because here I am, we go back in time in the story, I'm getting all upset because I'm just not feeling effective. I'm not feeling what I felt as an agent. I didn't join the FBI to work cybercrime. Now I'm working cybercrime. The cybercrime problem keeps getting worse. And then I realized that there was a commonality in almost all of my cybercrime incidents. All of my cybercrime incidents had commonalities in them. And I call these the 4 truths to cybersecurity. So here's the first truth to cybersecurity. The first truth in cybersecurity is nobody ever expected to be a victim. I dealt with that all the time, especially in Nashville, because Nashville was the Silicon Valley of healthcare, and we had 500 healthcare companies. And a lot of them would say to me, oh, we're not as big as HCA or Community Health Systems. We don't have anything to worry about. So then I would go over to companies and they would say, well, we're just a small company. My best definition of a small company was a $300 million company. $300 million, they were a small company. I guess compared to an HCA or something, they were a small company. And then I would go out and I would talk to companies on the New York Stock, on the NASDAQ, the publicly traded companies, because that was my job with the FBI. I was going out and I was sitting down, and besides dealing with 1,000+ victimizations, I was sharing what I've learned. And that was one of the things. So I talked to companies on the NASDAQ. The companies on the NASDAQ would say to me, well, we're only on the NASDAQ. The bad guys are only targeting companies on the New York Stock Exchange. I would talk to companies on the New York Stock Exchange, and you know what they tell me? We only have a net asset value of $5.8 billion. Why would anyone want to target us? And I'd want to yell and go, are you out of your mind? I mean, where are you getting your information from? People Magazine? The bad guys do not care who you are. They want access to your information. And I came up with a list and I wrote it out one Saturday. I sat down, I'll share it with anyone who wants it. The top 30 reasons, excuses why I got from organizations that they don't take cybersecurity seriously. I'm not saying why they're not buying product. We're not talking about products. We're talking about why they are not taking it seriously, because they don't think they have anything that anybody wants, or they don't feel that they fit the threat profile, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this with Rob when we come up in a couple of minutes, because this is one of the things that drove me absolutely crazy. The second thing is that, picture it, what do you have as an organization? What is your stuff? Are you a pharmaceutical company? Are you a university? Are you a healthcare company? Think about what is your stuff. Every organization has different stuff. And what I tell people, and this is where, because I do coaching for organizations, companies don't know what their stuff is. Because we end up seeing so many different cloud-based platforms that are out there that the bad guys are targeting, such as they're targeting the payroll accounts. When the bad guys steal the username and password from the payroll account, they were able to log in remotely. I've seen them get into Paylocity and healthcare information. They're able to steal all that information. The business email compromise, completely out of control. I'm going to talk to Rob about that. And I'm seeing it all the time. The FBI put out an alert in 2015 on the business email compromise. And the FBI just put out another one. I think it was the same exact one. And companies are still struggling with it. The business email compromise now is probably at 30 billion reported over the past couple of years. That number keeps going up, because I can tell you from working for the FBI, I touched probably about $150 million worth of losses in my area of responsibility. And when I would look at the Internet Crime Complaint Center to see how much was reported, only $900,000 was reported to the Internet Crime Complaint Center. So I want you to picture, as an organization, what is your stuff, and picture that the bad guys steal it. And I'm going to tell you truth number 2 on my 4 truths to cybersecurity. Once the bad guys steal your stuff, it's almost impossible for law enforcement to get your stuff back. And one time when I get challenged about that, I had one individual who challenged me and said, how could you say that? How can you say that law enforcement can't get your stuff back? And I just mentioned this. Office of Personnel Management, 21.5 million records stolen by the Chinese government. Anthem, Blue Cross, Sony, JP Morgan, Equifax, Sony, those 7 breaches, almost 4 billion pieces of information. What do they all have in common? I was a victim of every single one of them. So picture this, your stuff is stolen, you're not getting it back. The third truth to cybersecurity is the chances of law enforcement putting the bad guys in jail is extremely challenging. Because if you would look at how we worked cases in '95, what did I say? Bad people were doing bad things to good people in my area of responsibility. Today, the bad guys are located overseas. They're located over in China. They're located in Russia. They're located in North Korea. The West Africans are getting so creative. Besides in their business email compromise, that's one thing. I was on the phone today with a friend of mine who I had to convince his elderly father that they convinced him that he needed to go over to England because he fell in love with a woman, and the romance scams, the elder scams are just out of control. I spent a half an hour trying to convince this individual that this person was not real. And these guys are so creative because they're hiring actors, they're hiring actresses. So if you put up there, if you have, and I have some stuff I'm going to give out because I wrote a whole chapter on elder scams. It's so important that we keep our kids safe because there's this gentleman already lost $46,000 and he is never, ever going to get that back. So as we kind of mull that over, and let's just think about a couple of other things. I mean, right now we hear about ransomware. It's in the news every single day. I've been talking about ransomware and the business email compromise since 2015. Every once in a while, someone will say to me, Scott, are you going to have a new talk? And I go like this, what do you mean a new talk? I've been talking about the same stuff I've been talking about since 2015. And in 2015, you know what I was saying? I'm talking about the same stuff from 2007. But ransomware is the new thing. It's all over the place. And the question that I get the most is ransomware. Do we pay the ransom or do we not pay the ransom? That is the number 2 question I get. I used to get, did I work on Hillary's email? And the answer is no, I'm in Nashville. I've never done that. But I'm going to ask you, because I like to see what the audience thinks about this. What do you think? Do you or do you not pay the ransom? Okay, come on. We have 28 people here. We have 15s. It's usually about the same. And that one person who says, I pay the ransom, thank you so much for being honest. Because for all of those, and 9 of them, and that's usually about right. When I was with the FBI, I never, ever advocated paying the ransom. I used to tell during my presentations, I would go, we, the FBI, say we do not pay ransom. It goes to support bad guys. There's some new legislation that's out there. But what have I been seeing now? Bad guys are targeting the backups first. Everyone talks about backing up. Backing up is so important, but backing up does not prevent ransomware. And I would get a phone call all the time. The FBI gets phone calls every day. The intrusion response companies get calls every day from companies. Hey, I got hit with ransomware. And the first thing I would say is, you're going to be okay as long as you have a good backup. So what did we all do? We backed up our stuff. Now the bad guys are targeting the backups first. So Stacy, I'm going to hit you up again. Another challenging question. How long do you think an organization can survive without access to their information?
It depends on the organization.
Okay, just think about any organization.
It depends.
Okay, how long can a small doctor's office, how long can a small doctor's office dry cleaner survive without access to their client information?
Yeah, not long. Because they have not long.
Not long at all. So, and that's a whole nother thing about that. So we have to start getting out of, when we talk about ransomware, we have to realize that backing up is great, but backing up doesn't prevent. And I have another great document I'll get for everybody because we're talking about the basic stuff here. And what do I see after talking to my friends over with Kroll who do intrusion response? Almost 85% of the ransomware that they're working on right now is being delivered through an email. Okay, so think about that. All right, so what do we have so far? The cybercrime problem is going up. And Stacy, I'm going to put you on the spot again. The cybercrime problem is going up. You're going to spend more money to keep yourself safe. And we know what happens when you spend more money and the problem gets worse. Bad guys steal your stuff. You're not getting it back. And the chances of law enforcement putting the bad guy in jail is kind of really slim to none. So Stacy, how do you think that makes most people feel? I
Like
know
they
you
have no control over their information or their data, that there is no way to control it.
no way. Hey, let's go over in the chat over here. I want to ask people, how does that make you feel, what I just told you? A lot of the responses I get is scared, angry, overwhelmed. You know what it gets me? It gets me depressed. Why does it get me depressed? Because I want everybody to remember this. This is the key takeaway I want you to remember from my discussion that I said today. Almost 90% of what I dealt with in my career could have been prevented if the organizations were just empowered with a couple of key pieces of information. And let's think about this. They were not empowered with that. And we're going to go into this when I talk to Rob a little bit about why people aren't. Sandy Parker said that she's peeved. In New York, that we have another term for peeved. But let's just stop and, try to process that. So what's the main thing that I've dealt with since 2002? I'm talking about email. Email is the number one attack vector, always has been, always will be. And at the end of the day, it's having individuals to understand that. And I'm going to go through a couple of different scenarios because, I have a lot of questions that I'm going to really ask Rob about that. I'm going to get to that. But here's what there was. The organizations didn't understand the 4 truths. If you don't understand those 4 truths, you're not going to be able to tackle the problem correctly. And if you do not know what your stuff is, it is game over. And also, and you're going to get copies of the book, so I'm not even going to really have to talk about this, but it was besides the email, and we're going to get back because I want to focus a lot on the email here today, but it's making sure that we don't have the same passwords for multiple platforms. And it's also locking things down with 2-factor authentication. Those are some of the commonalities that my victims did not have, or that my victims all had. They didn't realize these different things here, and they weren't trained to be able to handle it. So, Rob, if I can get you up here, because I have a couple of questions. I want to bring my good friend Rob Fry up, and Rob and I both share a little bit of the sarcasm here. So I want you to process what I've well, first of all, Rob, why don't you just introduce yourself first? That would be great.
Sure. I'm Rob Fry. I'm the CTO at ArmorBlock's email security company. I've been in the security industry for about 25 years now.
Great. Well, Rob, I'm glad you're here. And it's also a big thank you for, sponsoring this event and making sure all these people, have the information that I'm providing them in the book. Because what I like to tell organizations, if you don't do what I tell you to do first, by understanding these things and dealing with it at home. One of the things I want to ask you, Rob, is when you get back to what I talked about first, and this is the trouble that I had. In my first truth to cybersecurity, nobody ever expects to be a victim. Now, you've worked on a lot of the sides of this issue. You've been with a lot of organizations. Why, every time I think there's a game changer that's going on in the industry, that people are going to really start taking these things and start paying attention. And to them, paying attention is throwing money at the problem, but they're not doing things right. What do you think that's all about?
I think it goes back to like what you said your first truth is. So first, they don't expect to be a victim. I think the second truth is, and you said it earlier, and I agree with it as well, is that the bad guy, the adversary, is very creative. And so whenever you come up with a solution that's based off of money, their ability to get around it is actually pretty high, which is one of the largest problems today.
Yeah. And so one of the other poll questions I want to get, because I want to feel what the audience is here. When it comes to the different email threats, what are you guys facing on a regular basis? Because one of the things that I can say that we cannot control, we can control how we react to things, but we cannot control what the bad guys do. So what are you guys seeing out there, which is probably the biggest thing that you're dealing with? Because remember, I go out and I can tell people that 90% of what I deal with could have been prevented, but that's an incredible oversimplification. That's an oversimplification of the problem because the bad guys are getting much more sophisticated. So what do we see over here? I mean, the gift cards, we still see that, the payroll fraud, the vendor fraud, the account takeover. So when it comes, and Rob, if you want to talk to any of these right now, please go ahead. Is this
Yeah, I think it resonates. I think when you get to the opportunity to talk with customers, I mean, there's the business vertical they're in, and that changes the types of attacks that they're seeing. But the fact that all these things are getting through tells you that they've been able to circumvent a lot of your existing security controls. And they're also, what's the creative and the sophisticated part is that they understand human psychology. And so they're sending you attacks that are based off of essentially the words are the payloads, and you're falling for it. It's coming from your CEO. It's coming from a known good supplier. And therefore you feel that it's either justified or that it's legitimate. And then you fell into the trap.
No, that's a great point, because this is what I really wanted to ask you about. I have a case a couple of years ago, right before I retired. It's a large organization. They spend a lot of money on information security. They have email filters in place. They have a tool which at the time was supposedly gold standard. So small companies buy small things, medium companies buy medium things, big companies buy medium things. So what ends up happening here, the organization also has two-factor authentication on their stuff. So they're protecting their stuff down. All of a sudden, they get an email from somebody they know and somebody they trust. And everybody knows that this company, the vendor's about to send them an invoice for that $3.5 million widget. It was a really big widget. All of a sudden, the invoice comes in to the organization. The organization gets the email. The accounts payable person is supposed to start processing it. 30 minutes later, another email comes in, which is identical to that email. It's on that same chain. So it's not a spoofed email. It comes on and it says, hey, Barbara, I just want to let you know that we screwed up and we overcharged you by 4%. Here is the new invoice, pay the old invoice. So what happens? She can't write the check, because I know what a lot of people here are thinking. No big deal. We have a separation of duties. Someone would catch that. But no, it went to internal audit. Internal audit said, okay, everything was good. It goes to the bank. It goes to the wire transfer room. They send it out to the bank. The bank calls them up, says, "Are you sure you want to send this?" They say yes. By the time we figure out what happens, it's 11 days later, the money's over in the United Arab Emirates. And the company called up the vendor screaming at them, going, wait a second, I bought email protection. I'm spending all of this email. What are you guys doing? There's no malware in this email. You guys failed. Was the customer wrong here? I mean, where do you see this? Where's the breakdown, Rob?
Oh, so this one, I mean, you're throwing the hard ones at me right off the bat. So this one's a really hard one because it's third-party risk, and it's the third parties that you actually do business with. And when you trust them and they're considered a trusted supplier, they also become a target. Because if you're a bigger fish, typically you're going to have better tools or better people or whatever the case may be. So who are they going to attack? They're going to go one step down in the supply chain or whatever the case may be. The other problem here is that the technology that is currently being used doesn't account for things like who the employee is, what types of emails have they seen, who are they receiving the emails from, and the different types of patterns that are happening every day inside of that organization and coming from the other organization that's actually been popped. And what needs to happen is for you to actually start to pay attention to that stuff so that you can defend yourself against other companies that have been compromised, in addition to protecting yourself from being compromised yourself.
But tell me a little bit. So, it's now you call out and you said, wow, if he thought that was a tough question, wait until you get to this company had an expectation. They bought something that said it was going to keep them safe. And it didn't keep them safe, because now look at this. Remember, the bad guys are always pivoting. And this is why we have to start pivoting, because in my groovy little planet, I believe this: if you tattoo, think before you click, you're going to be fine. That's not going to take you that much. But look how they pivoted here. Mm-hmm. This company has the best tools in place, but what do? They start sending emails that do not have malware in them.
Yeah.
And now there's no, because most of the stuff of the solutions out there are only focusing on that. So explain to everyone here, like, what's the difference with what you guys do? Because I'm going to tell you point blank, when I talk to a company, you know what they tell me? I got Microsoft Defender. I don't need anything else.
Yeah, I mean the biggest challenge. I mean, if you go back to like your big moment with with the Target breach and when a lot of this started, the attacks back then were URL based and they were file based. And you know what came about that were technologies that looked for bad URLs and detonating the files that look for the malicious code inside of it. What happened then is the adversary does what they do. They do better recon. Instead of doing massive attacks, they do very targeted attacks. They start to go after the money rather than necessarily trying to break into the company. But they also just switch the attacks altogether so there's not a malicious payload. The payload is the words. And so what we focus on is actually the language that is inside of the email. Our ability to detect those types of attacks is really quite good. And it's really our ability, what we call it is protecting the human layer. So there's a lot of people on the phone here, a lot of security people, they understand training users and they probably have an education program. But the fact of the matter is if you're trying to train your user to look for these types of attacks, they're going to continue to happen. And so what you actually have to do is what I would call is language forensics. So I saw back in the day, the very first time I saw somebody do language forensics, I was just fascinated. I was working at Netflix at the time. We had an employee that was leaking things on Reddit, of all places, company confidential secrets, all sorts of things we didn't want out there. We had somebody on staff. She was able to, after about the 7th post out on Reddit, she was able to reverse it. She knew what region they were from, what college they went to. She narrowed it down to the office, all these other things. And now if you look at what we do, that's essentially what we're doing. And if you apply that to what Scott just talked about, if you're looking inside of the patterns for both the language and for the things that are just a little bit different than what should actually be there, whether it be in tone and the bank account numbers that are inside of there, whatever the case may be, what we have to do in order to be able to catch these guys is kind of broaden the net on the data that you're actually looking at. And that's where the older technology that you mentioned, they're focused on a very narrow data set. Therefore, they're essentially speed bumps into that for most of the adversaries these days.
No, that's great, because there was one incident that really plays into this in my mind, and that's the Yahoo breach. You take the Yahoo. Listen. I'm
former Yahoo right here, by the way.
Listen, I'm not going to go into it, but this plays well because you take the Yahoo breach and the Marriott breach, and now you have almost 4 billion pieces of information. And what did Yahoo and Marriott tell us all to do? Change our username and password. And let's just pretend that everybody changed their usernames and password. What's the problem? And I'm going to ask you, Rob, out of those 4 billion emails between the Yahoo and Marriott, what percentage of those people do you think have either an iPhone, an iPad, or a Mac computer? Take a guess. What do you think?
Can I just say a large percentage?
Yeah.
Large percentage.
How about this? I'm going to say, so if I said it was 5%, you'd say it's a lot more than that, right?
Oh, way more than 5%.
Okay. What's 5% of 4 billion besides a really lot? That's 200 million. So out of those 200 million Apple users, I promise you 99.9% go like this. I got a Mac. Macs don't get viruses. Well, what's the problem over here? The bad guys aren't writing viruses. All they're realizing on the fact that, and what's the latest study, Rob? What percentage of the population is using the same password for multiple platforms?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was just going to mention is the other problem with what you're talking about is password reuse. And it's a large majority.
Think about this. Now we have a massive password reuse. So let's even say it's 10. Let's go on the low side again. Let's even say it's 5% of the 5%. Now we're talking about 20 million. And I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, that number is probably, we were talking billions. Right now, those individuals are the third parties that your organizations are dealing with today. That's when we talk about the third party risk. Because today you're going to get the greatest tools in the world, but your accounts payable person is not going to get an email from Boris Badnoff at cybercriminal.org, which any spam filter is going to block. They're going to get an email from somebody you know and somebody you trust. So let me give you another scenario, Rob, and you tell me how you could have played off on this. I have a case. I have a financial services firm. The CEO gets an email from the CFO. No, the CEO gets an email, again, third-party risk. They get it from an attorney. The attorney sends him a PDF file. He sends an email back to the attorney because his stellar cybersecurity awareness training said, if you get an email out of the blue, you know, we don't need artificial intelligence. Just send him an email back and ask him, did he send it to him? Well, the account's taken over. So the bad guy sends an email back and says, sure. He clicks on the PDF. The PDF turns into an HTML file that says nothing more than, hey, here's a Dropbox. Here's a document on Dropbox. In order to authenticate, in order to get this document, you need to provide your Microsoft credentials. And when I asked most people, I said, do you need your Microsoft credentials to open up a Dropbox document? And everyone goes, no, you don't need them. And I go, what about your employees? Are your employees trained to do that? And then when you go over, I mean, I have QuickBooks. You can authenticate. There's so much single sign-on. He clicks on that. He gives up his username and password. And now the bad guy does the business email compromise and steals all of his information because of now it's on Microsoft 360. And again, he had a platform there, and what he's doing is going, wait a second, how come my platform didn't stop this? Because there was no malware. With what you guys are doing, do you have something in place that would be able to pick up something like that?
Yeah, you can actually go out to our blog and read about it, but we've seen the Capital Ones, we've seen the Dropboxes, we've seen all the ones. I mean, the HTML type of attack is a popular one recently, where they either do it as an attachment or embedded inside of the PDF. But these are the exact types of things that we're designed to actually handle. And again, like we're taking into account multiple different factors in order to be able to discover it. But that's not something that the existing technologies are doing. And it's the thing that's the reason why that thing even hit the inbox to begin with. You know, usually by the time you're sitting there, you know, the responding back, the thing I like to tell users is I like to tell the stories about how the lawyer sent it, and that the fact that the CEO responded is kind of the first failure. And the fact that you responded, just the bad guy lights up. He just lights up because he knows I fished you, I've got you on the reel. I'm reeling you in now. I'm going to ask for gift cards. I'm going to ask for whatever the case may be. But from our perspective, there's a lot of tells that are inside of that, whether it be statistical, whether it be the actual loading of the HTML, comparing that log on to the URL where it's actually at. There's a lot of things inside of there that you can use to do detection. And so that's what we're actually doing at AutoBox.
Yeah, no, because that's really troubling, because when you say that, I mean, let's just stop and put this in perspective. Email's the #1 attack vector. So where it's almost getting to the point where you can't trust that email from anyone unless they have two-factor authentication. Yeah, because if not, and just think about this for my companies here who went out here and said that they're not implementing the two-factor on the endpoint for their organization, then their companies can be used as, you know, attack vectors to launch against other companies. That's what I find really troubling. What else are you guys seeing in the research? Because you guys are doing a lot of research. I spoke to your CEO about that, and he was explaining some of the things. What are you guys seeing in the future? How is this artificial intelligence? How is it playing more of a larger role in what you're doing, and where do you see that morphing into in the next couple of years?
Well, I think the first place you start is that the adversary is using it. And I think that's a really fascinating thing to say, because typically the adversary from a technology perspective and a capability perspective is ahead of us. And so to say that we're going to use ML and AI usually turns people off. But the fact that the adversary has all these data sets that you mentioned, where there's billions and billions of records, they're mining this information to do recon, to look for targets to attack that are going to be easy. And then from our side, the type of models and algorithms we use are typically language-based, in which we're essentially trying to look at what's happening at the global layer, what's happening at the org layer, and what's happening at the user layer. In order to understand those three layers, in order to be able to provide protection based off of what your normal activities are and then what's suspicious. Whether that's something that's coming in from something that's easy to tell because the DMARC or SPF is not configured correctly, or whether it's you've been receiving an email from a CEO from another company and all of a sudden he emails you out of the blue with different words, different types of language patterns than he's ever used. And so these are the things that you have to use kind of going forward because that's what the adversary is using. And so we're adjusting to the types of attacks that they're leveraging in the present.
Yeah. And that's where when we talk about what we're doing, where are we investing our money? Right now, a lot of the attacks, because I have a lot of good friends of mine who are they're doing intrusion response work. And I'm just amazed right now that every single day they are dealing with the business email compromise. They're dealing with ransomware. And when I had a conversation with a buddy of mine who runs a huge global practice, almost 85% of IR work is being facilitated by email.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we got to really start focusing on that, because here I am going out telling everyone, because, your end users, think before you click. If you get an email, and as I say, everyone over here, and, maybe they won't be able to do this, but think about this. Today, I'm going to get, if all of a sudden, and I'm in Williamson County, Tennessee, for about, 90 miles from Huntsville, if I got an email on this rainy Wednesday, and there was an email from my kid's school saying that, hey, we just want to let you know that tomorrow the school is closed because there was a massive outbreak. Here is the notification. I like to think that I'm going to stop and go time out. But Rob, I'm going to probably click on that link. I know I'm going to click on that link because I'm going to do it when I'm getting in the car. I'm going to do it on my iPhone. I'm going to hope my iPhone's going to keep me safe. And then my only telltale sign, where I don't like to say artificial intelligence, I like to say my lack of intelligence, or my intelligence might kick in, but it's going to go, okay, wait a second. It wants me to open up a Google document and it wants me to enter in my username and password. That's going to be my telltale sign. And I'm in information security. So what advice would you give for people here? What else should they be doing? Like, what else when it comes to email, what else should they be thinking about?
I mean, most security people believe in context. So there's been a lot of attacks, and what most people want to understand from the attacks, especially from their vendors, is provide me more context. Where I think that's interesting is if you look at a lot of these specifically email phishing type of attacks, 70% of enterprise data you just mentioned, most of our communication is done through email and messaging platforms. Well, most of that is textual. And then behind the textual information is the person and the org. And so when you're able to aggregate that type of information and then leverage it from a defensive standpoint, and then also when you see an attack, you were mentioning not the sophisticated, but the believable workflows of what the adversary is providing to users. I'm going to provide you something that's either going to, it's coming from your boss, so you feel, the onus to respond, or, my account's going to expire, you need to reset your password. And then what happens after that when you click on that link is a believable workflow. But there's many, many contextual clues that are inside of that, either from who is information, DNS information, URL information, but then also just, we don't tend to work in silos anymore. And a lot of what we do is mostly predictable. This is one of the things the adversary is actually depending on when they come to attack us. And so what we do is we defend what actually is legitimate inside of that based off of what is normal for you to do on a daily basis, and look for kind of the abnormal and point that out for you. So in that particular context, we're essentially raising the bar on attackers and helping to defend your network at the same time.
No, you make a great point, and it just comes to me because when I'm sitting down with the CISOs and the security people, and they're responsible for the network, they're responsible for the email security, where are the bad guys going after? They're going after the financial folks.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, even if I would, and when I talk to the financial folks, because when I talk to the CFOs And I'm like, are you training your people that if they get an email and someone wants to change bank account and routing information, are they going to do that? And then they just kind of have this aha moment where it's like, unless they've been the victim of a business email compromise, and they change their behavior, but they've already lost now $3 to $5 million. But you brings up a really good point, because I keep thinking here from my point of view that how do I provide training to the financial folks within an organization that's going to get them to do this, because it's not being handled on the security side. I haven't seen any security awareness training over here and all they're talking about is think before you click. And what you guys are doing looks like it's going in a little bit deeper here. So it's trying to have that conversation, because you hit up on something that I've really never heard anyone talk about. You guys are going after the workflow. Explain that a little bit more again, because I haven't heard, I understand it completely, but I just think that's a great concept on what you guys are doing that provides you to be different than the others.
Well, I think one of your examples, if, let's say it's payroll fraud, right? Like if it goes to the person who works at the front desk, it's not going to work because that person can't do anything about payroll fraud. They're limited. But the attack is not going to that person. It's actually going to the payroll person, which means that there's an identity around these attacks, and therefore there's a workflow. And so if you understand the different attacks from a workflow perspective, if you understand it, and one of the things that we like to do is we like to integrate with Active Directory. We get your titles. We're able to then take the body of the email, the substance of the email, the context of the email, compare that to the user. Like, is the attack actually going after something that's odd, and it's payroll fraud or direct deposit fraud or whatever the case may be. And so it's not just looking at the workflow of what happens after the user clicks or goes to the website. It's also looking at what happens before and who it's actually kind of going after. Now, we've also focused on what happens in the after of what's there. We'll do the kind of exploration of the URLs and all that type of stuff. But for us, it's more important to understand, and I think this is one of the things that's been missing in security for a long time, is having products that actually absorb and understand the internal workings of a company and the internal users. Like, all products can tell you a threat and tell you about an attack. But what does that mean to your internal users? What does that mean for that specific user that was attacked? And I think if you provide that type of context, especially when it comes to phishing, it's like, oh, here's fraud that was committed because somebody was trying to impersonate the CEO. But it was coming from the CEO's personal Gmail account, which he does email with. That happens all the time too. But he got compromised because he clicked on something in his personal address rather than in his business email address. And so there's another workflow that you kind of have to consider, but that we've seen in the wild before, and it will continue to happen.
No, that's great, because for all my information security people here, and Stacy, you only remember this from the bureau days, it doesn't matter what you tell your executives; they're still going to do whatever the heck they want to do, and they're going to still put. I have another discussion with a company that I have to sit down with the executives about, because the executive teams want to use their personal G drives to have their own information. So now what we're doing is we're kind of putting this in, and like what I always say is, when I talk about things, I really oversimplify the problem. 90% of the bad things could be prevented if organizations, excuse me, I'm having such a hard time today. I know I look like I'm going through easy, but if you would just follow what I provide you and everyone here today, because we have a good group of people, are going to get a copy of my book. You're going to get an email tomorrow from Armor Blocks, and they're going to ask for your address. So you'll definitely everybody here will get a signed copy. This way I don't have to talk about it at all. What I want to do is open up the next couple of minutes and see if there's any questions about anything that we spoke about today, because I find this fascinating, and I think this is really great on the way you're doing it, because it kind of played in for the longest time what I talked about. The problem's getting worse. We keep spending money. Everybody has things, everybody has traditional things, and you guys are in such a unique place where what you've really have done is you've pivoted to what the bad guys have done, because all of a sudden everyone's starting to build tools to block malicious URLs and this and that, but you guys are doing things and you're actually pivoting. should I ask? I mean, I don't want to break the rules, Stacy. I don't want to read questions. So go ahead.
But if you can see it. So Kathy is asking us that you said backups are targeted first. How do they protect their backups?
Do we have another hour for me to go into that whole thing about that? That's a whole nother discussion, Kathy. I'll send you a document. You know, anyone here also hit me up on LinkedIn, and I'll send it to my friends over at Armor Blocks. But the FBI put out an unbelievable ransomware prevention guide in 2015. And you know what? It's still the same stuff here today. And these are some of the things that we have to consider, like knowing what is on your network. These are a whole nother conversations, but if we don't know what's on our network, and Rob, you'll love this. Everyone goes, hey, what product should I buy? And I go, hey, does everyone have admin rights? They go, yeah. I go, look, we have to have a another conversation. But Kathy, yeah, we'll get you that information. But just remember, backing up is so important, but backing up does not prevent ransomware from occurring. And if there's, you know, Rob, I want to kind of leave it to you for a couple of last words here. What's the one thing, summarize this in the next minute or so. What's your one big takeaway? What do you want people here to remember from this presentation?
I think, you know, one, I mean, you make a lot of really solid points. I think, you know, your 4 truths, you know, they resonate with me. I think from an email cybersecurity standpoint, your points around, you know, you can't do the same things. You got to make sure you're doing some of the basics. If you don't have 2-factor, make sure you go do those things. You know, we see that all the time. And those are the high risk targets. Those are easy ones. I think from a technology solution, you know, the reason the people are losing billions and billions of dollars every year is because the current solutions don't actually address the current type of attacks. And so, you know, we believe very much in, like, you know, email, you know, security layers. We feel that we're one of those security layers in order to prevent this type of attack, all the different types of attacks that we've kind of talked about on the show today. And realize that, I mean, there are alternatives. There is hope for this. You know, between you know what Scott has talked about, you know, with some hygiene and with some basic security practices, and then realizing that new capabilities are coming online, you know, there is hope in the future for being able to prevent these types of attacks.
Yes. And you know, my one thing, if I'm going to leave off for everybody today, I never just have one thing. So I'm sorry. I can't. My disease. But just realize here's your quick takeaways. Make sure within your organization, make a list of those apps. We used to call it shadow technology. Now we call it the cloud. You know, make sure all of these things that are mission critical in your organization have 2-factor authentication. Are your payroll sites, do they have that? What about your HR platform? What about your Salesforce? What about your marketing? Realize that cybersecurity, realize that the problem keeps getting worse, but 90% of what I dealt with could have been prevented. As I still hang out with all my FBI buddies, we do see a lot of sophisticated stuff, but a majority of this stuff could have easily been prevented. And I really appreciate my friends over at Armor Blocks today sponsoring this. I appreciate everyone being on the line for this. You're going to get a copy of the book. And just be safe. Stacy, if you'd like to say a couple of, I think we do have another question.
And I think it's a thank you.
Oh no, fascinating topic.
So yeah, so I have 2 things that when they get the email from Armor Blocks tomorrow asking for PII information, to please go ahead and give that if they want their copy of the book. That will not be a scam email tomorrow. It will not be a takeover account. So please respond to that so you can make sure that you can take a look at that. So that's number 1. And number 2 is, Scott, you know, we were remiss to mention IC3.gov because they do they put out a lot of the current scams. Because I know a lot of the times in the field office, we would get those calls on the complaint desk, and it would be someone saying, I got this particular email, and it wouldn't have been 2 days before that IC3 would have put out, hey, this is the latest scam that we're seeing. You can sign up for those emails to come automatically, and you can unsubscribe at any time, but that's a great way to see the current scams and the current some of the current threats that are out there.
Absolutely. And when you get a copy of my book, the 2 chapters you want to read first are keeping your kids safe and keeping your elderly parents safe. And if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'll send those to you. I have those digitally, but you got to read them and share them with that. Because at the end of the day, if something happens to your kids or your elderly parents, things aren't good. Well, listen, everybody, I think this is a perfect time for me to end.
Yeah, so thanks to everybody for joining us. I said coming out and supporting our WESIS chapter. I have a copy. I've read a copy of Scott's book. It's an easy read. There are some great tips that you can do while you're reading the book that won't take any time. So thanks again. Thanks again, Armor Blocks. Thanks, Abby and Rob, for helping us out today. Y'all did a fabulous job. You're a fabulous partner. And we look forward to hopefully seeing y'all on another event. And with that, I will say thank you. But one plug we'd love to have you join us on our next event, November 5th, that is with our topic being cyber counterintelligence, hosted by retired Special Agent Darren Mott, who works in cyber counterintelligence. So we'd love to see you again on the 5th. You can register for that on our WESIS website.
And let me tell you, Darren's a good friend of mine, and and you're going to love him. I learned my speaking from Darren.
Thank y'all. Enjoy your evening.